Welcome to History at Highnoon for October 2023. We got one more session and then we're taking a break because we're all going to have Thanksgiving and Christmas. I would like to thank everybody out there that attended Legacies, Legends, and Lies. We had a really good crowd. The comment cards have been absolutely marvelous. So mark your calendar, June the 9th, 2024, we're going to try it again. If I'm able to handle it again. I'm going to turn it over to Jim to introduce our speaker.
Come on up, Colonel. Thank you very much, Carol, and we always are so grateful for all that you and your family do for the Coffee County Historical Society. Folks, it's my extraordinary pleasure to introduce to you Colonel Donnie Corson. Now let me tell you a little bit about Colonel Corson, and we've invited him. I'll give a couple of snippets and then he'll take it and run away from it. We've asked him to talk about himself and his career in the United States Army. Now, I think we all know what an extraordinary thing it is to rise to the rank of colonel in the United States Army. That's quite an accomplishment, and we appreciate your achievement and your service. Now, a little bit about background. This gentleman hails from the metropolis of West Green, Georgia. And he's a graduate of West Green High School, but it's intriguing to learn that he's not the first member of his family to graduate from West Green High School. 3 siblings were actually valedictorian of the West Green High School class when they graduated. He said for some reason, the smart gene sort of got weakened by the time. I choose to disagree with that. He was president of his class, president of the 4-H club, and did all sorts of wonderful things, which just presaged a lot of accomplishment. Holds college degrees from Troy University and masters in human relations from the Pacific Lutheran University. All of those things augmented his extraordinary service in the United States Army. Donnie's the father of 3 children, Donnie Jr., Wendy, and Nikki. Many of you have met his wife, Kathy. She's out at an art studio session. They're getting ready for an October exhibit with the Wiregrass Art Guild. Kathy's an extraordinarily accomplished person herself, career military officer. Do you folks know where the geographical center of the United States is? Alaska pulls it way over, but if you leave Alaska out and just go with the 48 contiguous states, the geographical center of the U.S. is a little place called Lebanon, Kansas. And if you put your index finger right on that, you come up with Superior, Nebraska, which is Kathy's hometown. So Donnie had the good fortune of meeting Kathy Harvey. They became married. They met in Washington State and married in Alaska, and have been living here in retirement here in Coffee County, much to our gain. Now, just a few awards, and then let's turn the spotlight over to Colonel Corson. Some of the military awards I think we all recognize and respect that the Colonel was awarded throughout his military career: the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross numerous times, Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal 5 times, Air Medal 38 times, Joint Commendation Medal, Army Commendation Medal, Master Army Air Aviator, and Parachutist. Donnie's here as a person that Coffee County is proud of. We're grateful to call him a friend, and let's have a warm History at Highnoon welcome for Colonel Donnie Corson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Donnie Corson. Was born at West Green, grew up at West Green, graduated at West Green, My mentor, first mentor, was James Moore. Many of you knew him as superintendent of schools. He was my coach when his first year of teaching was when I was in the 12th grade. I graduated from West Green in 1955, and James, later he came to me and said, "Colonel, I want you to be one of my pallbearers." And I said, "That's an honor." Well, about 2 years later, he came to me again on the farm, James Moore, and I could tell he had a serious tone about what he was wanting to say. And he looked at me and he said, "You're not going to be one of my pallbearers." And then I said, "No, just a minute. I've kept myself in shape just for this." And he, wait a minute, he said, "You're going to give my eulogy." And I said, "Coach, I have to think about this because I'm not sure I can do that justice." And he said, "You leave that judgment era to me, to him." And I said, I will. So anyway, enough of that. Graduated West Green, as Jim said. My peers elected me to be their president and president of 4-H Club and also the Beta Club. I was not impeached. There might have been times that they felt like it, but I was prepared each time we'd have a meeting, and I enjoyed the responsibility and being in charge. So I joined the Georgia National Guard as soon as I turned 18, and next thing I knew, they had selected me to be the Soldier of the Year. Captain Joe Ray was my captain. And I enjoyed that and went out to South Georgia, played a few sports, and Coach Bowden was my coach a couple times. And I was not satisfied with the direction I was going, so I joined the military. After getting out of basic training and advanced individual training, we had taken mental tests to see just who was qualified to go into certain types of skills. For example, you don't want someone that can't read a road sign to be a medic. When someone's working on my heart and a wound in combat, I want them to be intelligent. So anyway, we finished those, and that night after taking tests all day, some crusty old sergeant came out and said there are 5 people that had made high enough on their scores to go take the officer candidate test. So we 5 went, and 3 of us made high enough to go to OCS. So I applied immediately to go to officer candidate school. I was the youngest in my platoon and made it fine, graduated in the upper 5% of my platoon. And the one thing I was most proud of was I had the fewest demerits, like Robert. Now, I don't compare myself with Robert E. Lee, but when he went to West Point, he had the fewest demerits of anyone in his West Point class. So anyway, from there, went into airborne training. And if you've never jumped out of an airplane, it's quite an awakening thing. My buddies asked me to go first when we were going to jump, Fort Benning. Well, the person who's going to jump first in this stick of 18 airborne, this is the first time we've been out of the airplane. So I'm standing in the door, and it seems like at least 3 or 4 minutes. And then the green light comes on, that's telling the crusty old jump sergeant to push him out. Well, I go out, and the only thing I could hear at that point was my heart beating. But I enjoyed it. So anyway, from there, went to flight school, and I had the honor of being the top. I had the highest flight scores in my flight class. Out of 36 that started, 27 graduated, but out of that, my flight scores were the highest. Now, not the mental side, but the other part was. I want to back up a little bit about OCS. We started out with 238 officer candidates. 100 of us graduated. And the other 138 were really fine young Americans, but they just didn't quite have it. Today they would be a second lieutenant if in the school, because standards have changed. The speaker at my commissioning was a Medal of Honor winner named Colonel Robert Nett. And he spoke for a few minutes, and I knew I needed to talk with him about combat. And I did. And he spent about 10 minutes with me while all my buddies were getting their gold bars put on, and their wives or parents are congratulating, you're now a lieutenant, you're going to go out and do great things. I talked to that colonel about surviving in combat, and it paid off. So anyway, after getting out of flight school, I was assigned to Fort Riley, Kansas as a helicopter pilot. And within 90 days there, I was selected to be the 2-star general's helicopter pilot. Things went well. All of a sudden, I get a call, say, Lieutenant Corson, you are going to Vietnam. And I did know where Vietnam was. It was French Indochina for a while, but then changed. But anyway, I went to Vietnam with some of the first. Was one of the first group to fly attack helicopters in combat, and that was quite an experience. But one thing that happened over there was the reports that were being sent out of Vietnam was, you know, we're winning the war. This thing's going to be over. So it was either Secretary of Defense McNamara or either Secretary of the Army, and General Maxwell Taylor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, came and spoke in May of 1963 to us at Pleiku and said, all of the forces over here are doing so well that you'll be home. We're going to win this thing. You'll be home by Thanksgiving. And I said, you know, the reports he's getting are not the same I see as I'm flying helicopters. So I go up after the speech and tell him, he invites me to come out and speak to him, and I tell him, the reports you're getting, Mr. Secretary, they're not accurate because we're doing a good job. But if this war, if we stay over here, we're going to be committed for 12 to 15 years. We're going to have to win truly the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people, and mainly the teenagers, because they don't like us. And he was getting ready to talk with me, discuss that, and General Maxwell Taylor, very sharp general, got between us and said, Lieutenant, your job is to fly the helicopter and leave the planning for the war with us at the Pentagon. So I saluted and backed out, and 1972 we pulled out of Vietnam. So that was 9 years later, and we really had a heck of a mess at that point. Anyway, at later times I went back to Vietnam, flew the Chinook helicopter, the large one that, let me get a picture of it. I had the honor of, this is a picture, all of you know what the Chinook looks like. It's the big tandem rotor, carries 32 combat troops with all their equipment, but it'll sling load about anything. And I had the honor of being selected to go fly with Boeing Vertol test pilots. And in Vietnam, we did lots of things with that helicopter that it was not intended to do, but it sustained and kept us alive also. But anyway, after Vietnam, went back into Fort Rucker to be in charge of attack helicopter training. And while I'm there, this is humorous today, but at the time it was serious. I was not quite satisfied with the tactical side of how we were or were not training our pilots to go be Cobra pilots in Vietnam. I had 37 instructor pilots working for me. Now, I don't say that boastfully, but we needed gun pilots in Vietnam. So I was rewriting my method of instruction. My phone rings, and I answered it, and said, "This is the White House calling," and I thought that was one of my, I thought that was one of my instructor pilots that was out somewhere, maybe picked up by the State Patrol or somebody, and he needed me to give him a character reference. And I was a little tired, and I said, "This is White Charger, send your mission." And there was silence. And then about that time, I heard, "White Charger, this is Razorback 6. You have 14 days to report here to the White House to be President Nixon's pilot and his detachment helicopter commander." At that time, let me clarify, the Marines flew him the president west of the Mississippi, the Army flew him east of the Mississippi. And this guy was my former commander in Vietnam. And I said, "Now what are my options?" And he said, "You don't have any options because President Nixon has already selected you to be his pilot." And I said, "Wait a minute." So anyway, I called him back the next day and I said, "I'm not coming. What I'm doing is more important. We're training about 150 Cobra pilots each month to go to Vietnam. And most anyone can fly the president around Washington or down to Key Biscayne, but I'm not going." And that colonel, he's just made lieutenant colonel, he said, "Donnie, you're making a mistake. You should come." And today I would have gone, wish I had. But anyway, that was a little humorous at the time. Went to Command General Staff College, and they asked me to, coming out, we had in 1972, the Army pulled out, the military pulled out of Vietnam. And the command and control reverted from an Army 4-star commander, Westmoreland and Abrams, to an Air Force 4-star. And I was picked to be that Air Force 4-star's briefing officer. And I enjoyed that, very challenging. And after I'd been there about 9 months, the 4-star sent one Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and me to Saigon to study while the headquarters had moved out of Vietnam into Thailand. And at that time, he sent the two of us to the defense attaché in Saigon and to study what's going on so that we could come back and brief him. We came back, and this Air Force Lieutenant Colonel told him things are going well. "General, we will win the war. The South Vietnamese are still holding their own." And when it came time for me, he said, I was a major, he said, "Major Corson, what do you think?" And I looked at that 4-star and I said, "We will lose, the South Vietnamese forces will surrender within 9 to 10 months. And there was total silence in that briefing room. And he wanted to know what I based it on. I quickly told him that at Leavenworth I was the #1 tactician with tactics in my class, and here's why they're going to lose. Well, in just a short time after that, they did fall. In Vietnam, now we go trade with them. Excuse me. We trade with Vietnam. We're one of their best trading partners, probably we are. But following that, I went back to Fort Lewis, Washington, and was XO of a battalion, aviation battalion. We were selected as the best battalion at Fort Lewis. Then I commanded an aviation unit. We were selected as the best aviation unit, and I really enjoyed it. Good pilots, good people. I went from there to, let me tell you, I ran in when I was a major, senior major. I was commander of this aviation unit, and this guy named H. Norman Schwarzkopf was a colonel. He had just made the brigadier general's list, and he needed some helicopters to support him. So I was asked to send some of my people out there to support him. And for some reason, he did not like the way things turned out. And he jumped all over my captain's flight leader. And the captain came back and told me what had happened. And I said, that's okay, I'll go take care of it. And he said, wait a minute, Major. He said, he is a bad dude. He said he's about 6'5", 6'6", and they call him the Bear. So I get my helmet and one of my co-pilots, and we fly in and land at his command and control tent out in the training area. And he thinks it's a general coming in. So he comes out, and here Major Corson gets out, and he says some things that are not appropriate to say in here to me, but I stood there and took it. And then I said, Colonel, let me tell you, before you go in front of the CG, commanding general, you need to know that he just picked my unit to be the best aviation unit at Fort Lewis. And he got real quiet. I said, we need to talk about training, because if you don't know how to use aviation, I can teach you how to use helicopters. And that didn't go across too well with him either. But he accepted that, and we became friends. 4 weeks later, he has his adjutant call me and said, you have him. Friday afternoon, I was going to have all my pilots, we were going to the officers club and have a cold beer. Good time for it. Anyway, 4 o'clock, I get this call. Colonel Schwarzkopf wants to talk with you. So I go in and salute him, sit down, and he says, Donnie, what I'm about to tell you, you're not supposed to know it, but I'm going to tell you anyway. You've just made the lieutenant colonel's list. You're going to be the inspector general for the state of Alaska, the regular Army, and the National Guard. You don't know that now. Well, the next Monday, I get a call from the Pentagon telling me that's where you're going. But he turned out to be my friend. Schwarzkopf was a tough guy. So I went to Alaska, was the Inspector General. I learned more about what is needed and to listen to what troops have to say about what's going on. Every time my inspection team would go out to inspect a unit, I'd go with them. And while everybody else is sitting around looking at, making sure everything is okay, I'm out talking with the PFCs and E4s about, are you being paid? Are you being fed on time? Things that are really important for morale. And things went well, and then I was selected. Schwarzkopf had told me, he said, you're going to be commander of an airborne infantry unit. I told him I wanted to stay aviation. He said, no, you got to go airborne infantry. So I did. Following that, I was going to Fort Rucker, Alabama, to be the director of flight training at Fort Rucker. The CG down there, when he was a lieutenant colonel in Vietnam, and I was a captain flying a Chinook, he went down in combat, and I picked him up. And he told me one day, Captain Corson, I'm going to do you a favor. So he asked for me by name, and I was coming to Fort Rucker. And Kathy was coming. She was going to be the director of protocol for the commanding general. She would have done a good job, probably better at that than I would being director of flight training. But anyway, I get a call from my assignment officer, and he said, Donnie, you're not going to Fort Rucker, you're going to Cincinnati, Ohio. Recruiting command is not making their mission. And the commanding general of the recruiting command has asked for you by name, He has just relieved the lieutenant colonel in Cincinnati that has recruiting responsibility for parts of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. I said, now wait a minute, what are my options? He said, either get out or go to Cincinnati. So I always wanted to watch the Cincinnati Reds play the Braves. So I went to Cincinnati and got all my 138 recruiting sergeants. And we came up with a plan, and we met or exceeded our mission for 33 months. The only one in recruiting command to do that. I was promoted to colonel. Yeah, one thing. While I was there, I had met in Cincinnati, I had met the two brothers, Williams brothers, that owned the Cincinnati Reds at that time. And I asked them, I said, if I could get President Reagan to come and throw out the first pitch for you, would you like me to do that? And, you know, that was, they both were conservative Republicans. Sure. So I called the White House the next day. I didn't go through channels, I just called the White House. And luckily, someone that I had worked with in Vietnam answered the phone, and I explained what I wanted. And this was in late February, early March. And he said, I'll go in and ask the president right now. So he goes in, he asked President Reagan, would he like to do that? And he said, sure. And he got as excited as I did because the Cincinnati Reds baseball team was his favorite sports team ever. And it was all set. So I called back on Monday, and it was all set. Reagan said he wanted you, he'd already pulled up my picture of me in my uniform. He said, I want Donnie Corson to meet me at the Cincinnati airport. I want him to ride with me in my car, the Beast. And he's to walk in with me. I don't want any publicity. I just want to walk in, throw the first pitch off, and I want to throw it off to Johnny Bench. Well, we can make that happen. So while I'm talking with this guy, and he's telling me about Reagan, he said, you want to talk with him? And I said, no, I'm sure he's real busy. And pardon this, he said, hell. He's in his office with his feet propped up on the desk with his cowboy boots on, and he's eating jelly beans. John Hinckley, 10 days later, tried to kill him. And so that was scratched. But I really regret that. After recruiting command, I told my assignment officer, he said, you can go wherever you want to. I said, I want to get in with Army ROTC, selecting cadets to be future lieutenants in the Army. And so that's where the last 6 years I worked with ROTC. My last assignments, I was in charge of ROTC at the universities in the states of Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, Alaska, Hawaii, yes, and the Territory of Guam. And I can tell you that every time I'd go to the University of Hawaii, Kathy would go with me. And we would have an ocean view room, and of course we'd pay for her flight, but she would not want to continue to go to Agana, Guam. She'd say, you go out and tell them I said hello, tell Sharon Takahashi I said hi, but I'm going to stay here at Waikiki. But I enjoyed my 32 years wearing the uniform. Wish I could do it again. Now, any of you have any question or comment, I'd be happy to discuss it with you.
What year did you go to Vietnam?
Thank you. The question is, what year or years did I go to Vietnam? I went, first tour was I arrived in December of '62. And I left 12 months later. We had, when I first got in country, we had 3,200 American military there. By the time I left, we'd built it up to 3,700. And then my next tour, I went back with the first cav, and we had 500 plus thousand at that time. Vietnam was, at that time, without question, the biggest mistake this country had entered into since the Civil War. It still hurts. Thank you. Any other question or comment?
Yeah, where did you meet Miss Kathy, and then what rank were you when all that came about, or whatever?
Thank you. The question is, he called her Miss Kathy because he's friends with Kathy and me, my best friend, Chris Malphus. We met, it's humorous. I told you about General Schwarzkopf. Anyway, I had just made the lieutenant colonel's list, and I wanted to give, in the military, if you're a military officer and you're selected for promotion to a new rank, you give a promotion party. She was a military officer, Transportation Corps, at Fort Lewis, Washington, and she came with some big brute guest that was in my unit, and I knew I wanted to meet her later. But I didn't want to go over and challenge him at that time, but he was a big dude. But anyway, thank you, Chris. We dated back into, she would fly up about once a month. I was in Alaska, and then I'd fly down to Fort Lewis, Washington, about once a month. And then we were married on the 31st of December 1977. And 46 years later, we're still happy, and she keeps me in line. Yes.
Were you involved in the first battle of the name with Howell? I can't think of his last name. The guy that they made the movie about.
Thank you. I've overlooked that. I was at Fort Benning, Georgia, flying Chinooks, and I was working with the artillery. We were teaching them how to hook up, rig the small 105 howitzer, and we could bring them in together and set them down, and within a very short time they'd be firing. So anyway, I'm out leading this, and we're setting up. I'm a captain. And I get a call. This pertains to your question. The question is, I don't know if was I in Vietnam or so forth with that time Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore? No, I was not. But anyway, I got a call that day and saying, Captain Corson, as soon as you can, you report to your flight operations. The colonel's jeep is waiting for you. And I finished the mission, shut the helicopter down, and come out, and the colonel's driver is there for me. I said, what's up? And he says, well, I can't tell you. Anyway, I go over, he takes me to where my battalion commander is, and there are two lieutenant colonels in there with him that are infantry battalion commanders. One is Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. One is Lieutenant Colonel Al Haig, H-A-I-G. You all know which. So, and I had no warning in advance to prepare for this. So I go in, and my battalion commander stands up and puts his hand on my shoulder, and he says, Captain Corson, tell my two buddies what it's like in Vietnam and how to use helicopters. And I had no idea really who they were until that time. And I gave them a quick overview, and about halfway through my talk, Lieutenant Colonel Haig said, Captain Corson, I want you to be one of my rifle company commanders. Well, that hits me very abrupt. And I look at my battalion commander, and he's going, He said, I don't want to lose you. You're doing anyway. So I tell Lieutenant Colonel Haig, no, sir, I need to continue working with the Chinooks. We're developing doctrine for use in Vietnam. Next morning, I'm coming into work, and I get there in my office, and 6 a.m., the battalion commander, my battalion commander's there, and he said, Donnie, you going with me to see Hal Moore? And Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore says, Captain Corson, I want you to be my B Company commander. Well, I told him no, I wanted to finish what I was doing. My battalion commander said, Don, if you want to go infantry, here's your chance. He is a good battalion commander. And I did not, but I was at Fort Walters, Texas. That unit deployed to Vietnam, and I followed what was being reported of that battle, the great battle that Mel Gibson was in, playing the role of Hal Moore. But that's how I knew those two. I later saw him, but anyway, they did a good job. Two great generals. Al Haig was, after he retired from 4-star, Moore made 3 stars, Haig made 4 stars, and he came back after he retired and was Reagan's chief of staff. Thank you.
Colonel, I wonder if you could comment on one or more of those items behind you.
Thank you, Jim. We've been talking flying. This is a lightweight flight suit, or flight jacket. And you put it on, fly. You have to wear it not in Alaska in the wintertime, because we have one much heavier. But that's my flight jacket. It has my rank on it, my unit, the one. So then, this is my flight suit, an experimental flight suit that the commanding general, Major General John Tolson, gave to me in Vietnam, and told me to wear it and then get back in about 2 weeks and give feedback to his aide-de-camp on whether I liked it or not. And I told him that it was comfortable, but it just did not. Once you sit in a helicopter for a while, your groin gets a little tight in a one-piece, whereas a two-piece suit gives you a little more movement. So I told that aide that, so we went with a two-piece suit, but I always kept this one and flew with it. This is the Army green blouse that you would wear. There are two other uniforms that are higher in dress being attire. The dress blue that would have your shoulder epaulets on it with the colonel in it, the rank, the eagle. But this would have all your decorations you'd won. The master aviator means that I've done a few things, and this is my flight helmet. That thing, I'll give it to a grandson or granddaughter one day, but it's it is not bulletproof if it's a 50 cal coming at you. Yeah. Let me show you. This is a picture of Kathy and me at the University of Hawaii in 1988. I had been invited to come over to speak at their Christmas ROTC military ball, and I'm wearing what is equivalent to the tuxedo for if you're in civilian attire. And as I told Jim Cottingham, Kathy sure made me look good. Yeah. But I enjoyed that speech that night. It lasted. Any other comments or questions?
This has been extraordinary.
Let me close it out. One more thing. I had the honor of speaking with the governor of the state of Washington's top 100 high school students. They were brilliant, and they drew me. Was to talk with them about leadership and motivation. One of them asked me why I joined the military. And so I thought about it, and I told him I enjoyed it. I enjoyed jumping out of airplanes, I enjoyed flying helicopters, I enjoyed being around the people that were in the military. Then I asked the group, how many of you plan to join the military? Now these were students that had just graduated from high school. Not a one raised their hand. And I said, who is going to defend this country for you to do what you want to do? And I said, how many of you want to be the next Michael Dell or Bill Gates? 80% of them raised their hands. Well, that told me, anyway, I reminded them that the Second Amendment article of the Bill of Rights says, and this is important, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. And that's what I left with them. And thank you for coming out today, and I enjoyed it. And hope you all live to be many more years and also healthy and happy.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. See y'all next month. Thank you.